Is it broadcast live? Broadcast. Shak's doing it. Perfect. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May peace and blessings be upon you all. We start by praising Almighty Allah and send salutations and blessings to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I would just like to say a very warm welcome to all Al-Imdaad radio listeners. We're live from Blackburn in United Kingdom with myself, Sadiq Patel. I have two guests with me. On my right we have Imam Fazl Rahman. On my left we have Angela Allen. I will introduce them slightly later on. But I hope and pray you are all well with the mercy of Almighty Allah. We look forward to hearing from you. If anybody would like to message through Facebook, if you kindly listen any Facebook messages, please listen to the radio. All you need to do is go on to our Insta account Al-Imdaad, or on Facebook through your iPhones, iPads, Androids and PC. Listen globally, Al-Imdaad radio, share with your friends and family and get everyone involved. Dear listeners, as you are aware, Al-Imdaad Foundation currently operates in over 73 countries around the world. Now with this new online radio, we are targeting the global communities to come together and become one united nation. With this new radio, you'll be left compelled, enlightened, convinced and purified, and inshallah, God willing, guide on the straight path, the path of eternal happiness and a life with nothing but blessings and barakah. So that's a bit of Al-Imdaad Foundation. Before we start, I just want to give a brief overview of today's show. Today's topic is one of those topics that usually Al-Imdaad Foundation have never embarked upon. It's a journey which Al-Imdaad Radio have never challenged or tried. It's a topic of bereaved by suicide, and suicide is the topic and the discussion which we're having today. It affects all our lives in some way or form. So that's today's discussion. Let me reassure you, nobody's an expert here. There's a panel with Angela and Imam Fazl here, which will be having a discussion around the table of personal feelings and thoughts and nothing else but that. So that's today's topic. But before we start, as usual per practice, would I take this opportunity to ask all listeners and viewers to take a moment of reflection and for a quick 30 seconds just think about those that you've lost and say a little prayer for them, please. Jazakumullah khair, thank you very much for that. Again, as traditional within the Islamic faith, what we always start with the recitation of the Holy Quran. So I'm going to ask and request Imam Fazl Sahib to just recite a few couplets from the Holy Quran and just give a brief translation of it. Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Considering we are here to discuss a topic which involves loved ones that you've lost, it would be appropriate for me to begin and commence this discussion with an important prayer that we normally pray for those who have left us. It is the beginning chapter of the Holy Quran known as Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of everything that exists, the Lord of the universe. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Maliki Yawmiddin, owner of the day of judgment. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'een. You alone we worship, O Allah, and from you we seek help. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Guide us onto the straight path. Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, the path of those whom you have favored. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين, not the path of those who have earned you anger, nor of those who have gone astray. Amin.
Jazakallah. Thank you so much, Mawlana. Okay, so as I promised earlier on, I want to introduce my two special guests. Both guests I have known for a very long time, since my stay in Blackburn and since I've lived in Blackburn. I've known Imam Fazal Sahab for as long as good 20 plus years. Imam Fazal is a full-time Muslim chaplain and an Imam at East Lancashire Teaching Hospital. Covers up to 3 hospitals, Royal Blackburn, Burnley and Pendle Community Hospital. Imam Fazal is also the Foundation Trustee of Star Academy and a board member on their Faith and Character Education Board. It was appropriate for me to invite Maulana and Imam Fazal Sahab because as part of the Muslim chaplaincy within the hospitals, it's been a challenging year, which no doubt Imam Fazal will share with us. The amount of COVID deaths we've had this year, I don't think Imam will have had throughout the years he's been there at the trust. And the time where no families are present at the time of the disease or the death, and the only point of contact is the Imam Fazal at that time, and liaising with the deceased family and comforting them. So it has been a very integral part of the role which Maulana has filled, especially within the Asian BME community at the hospital. So we look forward to having you here, Maulana. So Jazakallah for attending. Then I have Angela Allen, who again I've known for a very long time. We were just discussing earlier on. I joined CVS in 2003 and Angela joined the organization in 2005, and since then I've known Angela. Angela has worked in the voluntary sector in and around Blackburn for at least 18 years. Initially worked at the Children's and Families Lead for the CVS before moving on to setting up what was then Families Health and Wellbeing Consortium, which is now known as Spring North Consortium. And they support vulnerable individuals and families within communities to improve their physical and mental well-being. And this next sentence which Angela has put in the bio, which this is the topic that we actually been talking about, we discussed today. Angela tragically lost 2 of her close family friends to suicide, and she, along with other bereaved families, have set up Bags for Strife to provide some support to others facing a similar tragedy. Again, like I mentioned earlier on, it's a topic that Al-Imdaad has never embarked upon. Why? It's a question I like to ask ourselves and the foundation, but it's something which we hear, and it's a topic that we're willing to discuss. And it's not a faith-based discussion, but it could lead to a faith-based discussion as well, because what you interpret as faith and what I would interpret as faith would be completely 2 different angles. So, as the title was Bags for Strife, what I'm going to do is introduce Angela and explain to us, Angela, what is Bags for Strife, something that you have set up 2 years ago?
Well, it's not even 2 years old, actually. Okay. We've only just registered the organisation as a charity this month.
Okay.
So it's very early days. It was based on the loss of my daughter 18 months ago. And we, at that time, realised the lack of support that was provided for those bereaved by suicide. So there's family and friends were fantastic. We had a really good police liaison officer. The hospital staff at Blackburn were great at the time, but that was on the first day. The second day, the third day, the third week, the third month, 18 months on, there's no support. So we wanted to fill that gap in some way, and I did a very short snap survey. It was basically a WhatsApp group message to a load of my daughter's friends saying, what were the 3 emotions? If you could describe the 3 emotions that you felt when you heard the news about Kat, what would they be? And lots of words came back, but the 3 or 4 main ones were blame, anger, guilt, and that's your acronym for BAG. And the other one was sadness, which was BAGS. So the idea was to create something that families could be given at the time when they've just heard the tragic news. They can be given something that is touchable, that's tangible, that they can either look into at that moment, or in the case of most people, you kind of put that to one side. But if it's a bag, it will sit there. It won't get thrown away like a piece of paper or a business card. Hopefully at some point, that family or that person will reach for that bag, and within it, there will be the support mechanisms that we felt were lacking at the time after Cat. As you mentioned, I've lost 2 people recently, so my daughter and my husband, and the experience was very much the same second time around, where that support just wasn't provided, and that was the kind of instigator for us to want to do something. So our charity is run by myself, my daughter and 2 stepdaughters, and friends who have also been bereaved by suicide, and other people that we've met through our journey who themselves have been bereaved by suicide. So we are all people with that horrible expression, lived experience. But, you know, hopefully with having that experience behind us, we can actually provide something that is useful. It will never change things or take away the hurt, but hopefully it will provide some comfort.
That's very good.
I mean, we had a discussion earlier on, and I mentioned this to you yesterday when I visited you a couple of weeks ago. I was driving back home, and a comment that you've made, that there's suicide prevention, but there's actually isn't any support for bereaved by suicide. And I said to you yesterday, that stuck with me for, you know, and it'll stay with me for a very long time. And that is the case, but why? Knowing the fact that I believe there's the statistics, how many suicide cases we have on a daily basis. Why isn't there any services out there?
So actually, now that we've started doing the research, we realise there are lots of services out there in that post-vention agenda. But it's knowing where they are is the difficult thing. So
accessibility, isn't it?
Yeah, and so since starting Bags, we've had time to research. But if you've just been bereaved, you are not going to Google or, you know, try and find out. You want something to be given to you rather than you having to access it. I mean, there is an awful lot. There's more around the prevention agenda, which you would not discount. Obviously, that has got to be the case. But recently, the post-vention agenda has had more funding put into it. And there are some great services out there. Locally in this area, there's Amparo that provide support to families. And there's others, that's just one that comes to mind. But I just think that families shouldn't be required to look for it themselves. It should, that information and that support and that understanding from other families that have been through it, I think should be given to them. So we're not trying to encroach on anyone else's territory with this. We're very much trying to just link it all up and putting it into an actual bag that people can just dip into when and if they need it.
So now I have, Angela, I really do feel that pain that you feel, because I've seen, you know, a large number of patients and relatives who have witnessed the last moments of their loved ones, and so I can relate to it. I can relate to it, and my sympathies are with you. Congratulations on setting up this charity, and I wish you every success. One question that springs to mind is, of course, you at the time didn't have access to these services. You probably didn't even know they existed. You do now, because you've researched it, you've kind of found out. So I suppose the question would be how, and you said it earlier, you don't expect families who are going through a very traumatic time, grieving, to go out and look for services. How would you find those families? Rather than families finding you? Yeah,
that's a really good question, and we've discussed this to the nth degree. I think there are there are constants in a bereavement journey, and particularly with suicide, police are a constant, so they will be in touch. The coroners are a constant, the hospital usually, or a GP. the funeral homes or equivalent, and a faith leader. And so those are the people that we will be talking to say, will you have the bags? Now I have had an email exchange with a few members of the police force in Lancashire, and they are keen to support the charity.
Good.
Similarly, I will be talking to colleagues at East Lancashire Hospital Trust, and we will then make connections with faith leaders as well, because we think it's really important that they are on board with this. We were very much supported, although I think I'd said to you before, I am not a religious person particularly, but our faith leader in our local village was a fantastic support to us. And they will be, no matter whether you have faith or not. Your faith leader within your community will be there.
Sure.
So we want to engage with them as well, so that, as you say, the families don't have to find it, but they are given the bags when they need it.
And are your plans to reach out to different communities in the community or the area that you serve?
Yes, absolutely. So our group that are running the charity are Lancashire based, but we've also got people from the south east of England,
Good.
from the Midlands, from Northern Ireland, because obviously you can tell where I'm from. So we're hoping, I think what we'd like to do is trial it in Lancashire, but we would hope that this
Good.
would go out nationally and beyond, because one of the bits of research that we have read in great detail was a report done in Scotland by the public health team up there, and they talked about the lack of postvention support around the suicide agenda and the impact that suicide has. And so I just think it's not just a reality in Blackburn or Lancashire, it's a reality across the board.
And I can perhaps from experience share with you that whole experience of stigma, blame, anger, is not just specific to the non-Asian community. It's across the board, and it's not talked about at all within the BME community, simply because of the shame element and because of the stigma element. But I suppose what that does is that kind of creates suicide contagion, because if nothing happens for support, then you get other members of the family doing the same thing. And I think it's so important that faith leaders take this on board and engage in having open and honest discussions about why suicide occurs and how the bereaved from the loss of the suicide could be managed. And we can maybe talk a little bit about that. And I was reading a paper that was written by an American organization called Muslim Matters, and they wrote some really good points about how postvention would really work. And one of the things you mentioned earlier about the language that you use, we can talk about that in a bit.
Very much so. I mean, there's an awful lot of publicity about how suicide is particularly prevalent in young men, age 35 to 43. I think it's that, but it's non-racial, it's non-religious, it's
Absolutely.
non-gender. It's everybody. My daughter was 22. My husband was 58, just about to turn 59. And it's across the board. It affects everybody. So we want the bags to be, printed in different languages, available to everyone across the population.
And tailor-made for the community, I guess.
Absolutely right.
Because you'd have Muslims that would expect certain different things as opposed to the Christians and the Hindus, for example. So again, that's something maybe you could take away and consider looking at.
Definitely. I mean, one of our issues at the moment, it's not an issue as such, but I think we need more diversity on the board. It's all females. We've got one guy that dips in and out, but
Martin.
Martin, But that's not unusual
But that's
because women are
interesting.
they're much more
Permissive. That you're absolutely right. And I was reading, thanks to Sadiq, I had no prior knowledge of the impact of suicide. Of course, we've been dealing with bereaved families for the last, especially as you said in your introduction, I've dealt with more bereaved families in the last 12 months than I have in the last 20 years, serving as an imam. So you can imagine. I suppose suicide is no different. It's a death nonetheless, although with different reasons and motives. But you're absolutely right. Women in even our community seem to be more permissive in their approach to post-suicide loss, as opposed to men are a little bit more aggressive, but also more reluctant, reserved, and don't want to discuss it.
And the women are more likely to reach out for help.
That's right.
And I'm not saying the men don't want to help, but because they're reaching out for help, they then express a want to help other people, whereas men less likely to reach out and therefore less likely to get engaged. But we are determined that we are going to diversify that board to make it much more inclusive and to just reflect that suicide
affects everyone.
Affects everybody, unfortunately.
It's a human tragedy.
Yeah.
And we touched upon this earlier on, the language of suicide, and I know we've mentioned it. This could go in so many different directions, couldn't it? And we would discuss this again yesterday. But there are certain words that people who have lost someone to suicide but find it hard to say. And I've never experienced anybody or bereaved by suicide when I experienced with yourself, with Damien and Kat, and I didn't know how to approach. I didn't know how to approach you. I didn't know how to approach Tash, Livs, and and the whole family. So how can we, or is there a certain set of words that can be used or should be used, or it's just one of those things where people just genuinely just understand the situation? I don't know. How do we go about dealing with that?
Well, I think the first thing, and maybe over to you on this one, is that initial language around when people take their own lives. We talked about this, didn't we?
We did, yes, and it was an interesting discussion I was having with my colleague, Reverend David Anderson, and he's doing a doctorate on this. And one of the things he's found is that the word commit, suicide, is actually quite detrimental to use, and people should kind of move away from using those kind of words. And the reason why is because it's got historical connotation of committing a sin, which in essence, I think even from an Islamic perspective, you can't hide away from the fact that obviously God has made human very sacred, and life cannot be taken without justification. And to that person, there may be a justification because he wants to escape. He's hopeless. He's got no way out, and the only thing he sees as a way out is to take his life. But the right to life is inherent in the tenets of Islam. And so there's 5 high objectives in Islam, which kind of acts as a code for the people in the country. So for example, the first one is the very first and foremost is the preservation of life. And then comes the preservation of your religion, and then the preservation of your sanity, and the preservation of your property, and so on. So these objectives, the high objectives of Sharia, give legislation to prohibit things that destroy life. So that is not just suicide. So suicide falls within it, and therefore suicide is prohibited, and therefore is a sin. And it goes back to the same thing as what the Christians used to believe, and perhaps to a certain degree still do. But here in this country, in the 16th century, it was illegal, as you know, to commit suicide, and therefore the person who committed suicide would need to stand trial. He's dead, but they still have to stand trial, and if he was found guilty, the poor body would be dragged in the street so people could learn a lesson from him. and the families would be tortured in the sense that their assets would be stripped of them because they've not cared for that person. And it all boils down to the fact that, of course, life can only be taken by God. But that soon changed in the 18th and 19th century. And so the word commit comes from that era of committing an illegal act. And Islam has some connotations to that as well. As I said, that obviously life is sacred and there is no justification for life. And because taking a life is almost denying that God is merciful. There's an element of kind of despair when you are taking your life, and God says over and over again in the Quran that do not despair of my mercy. And there's a very famous verse where he says, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُمْ رَحِيمًا, where it's don't take your own lives because God for you is ever merciful. And I think the challenge is, of course, the person who's going through that difficulty, he needs help, and he needs help at the right time. And that help is I think it needs to be not just medical intervention, and that's important, professional intervention, but also spiritual intervention. For him to realize that God has put him in that position, or her, really as a test, and God hasn't abandoned you, and that's just a means of you going through that journey to realize there's a higher power, and that person needs that intervention, spiritual intervention, through establishing a greater relationship with his Lord, because God says with every difficulty there is ease, and it's so true. You've just got to ride those waves of difficulty before you see light at the end of the tunnel, and that's where they need help.
I mean, you're so right, man. You couldn't put it any better. But that's somebody whose faith, and I know if God forbid if something like that happened in my family or anything, faith would be my go-to, and that would help me to get through the situation. Earlier on, you mentioned, Ange, that you're not faith-based, or you're not, So, what kind of faith helped you get through, or helping you getting through 18 months on?
My faith is my friends and my family. So they are in the analogy of bags, which obviously I've lived and dreamed for quite some time, I refer to them as the sandbags. Friends and family are the people that stop you becoming overwhelmed and flooded by the emotions that suicide can bring.
Brilliant.
So my friends and my family have been my sandbags, and they've been my faith.
Support.
I have faith in them, and they have kept me going and kept me living, really. I think my daughter and Damien, they lost faith in themselves, and they lost faith in the support around them for that particular moment in time. And like you said, it's riding that storm, it's getting over that challenge, and realizing that actually in your belief it's Allah that will save you, and in mine it is the friends and family that will.
Sure.
So it's and I think there's just so many similarities in it. There's no again that there's no difference, is there?
No.
But going back to the language thing, we've it's really difficult to avoid saying committing suicide.
No.
And I weirdly, I think I mentioned this to you yesterday, we set up a Bereaved by Suicide group nearly 3 years ago in Blackburn, and that was before I'd lost my family members. But it was a guy called Tony Harrison. I don't know if you knew him. He's a local chap from Darwin. He lost his daughter to suicide 15 years ago, and Tony and I had been sitting on various mental health groups, and we decided that there was a lack of support. One of my best friends lost her husband at that time, and she and her mother-in-law really struggled to find support. So we set up this group, and we talked about that, the language, and trying to avoid it, and because it has those associations with sinning. So yeah, we're trying to change. Well, everyone should try and avoid saying that. But for me, the language, as you said before, there's so many different directions for this, and because when I heard the news about Kat, I didn't have to say the words to anyone because my husband Damien, and my family told everybody. So I don't think I said to anyone, probably for at least a year, about my daughter, because everyone knew. And then when it came to my husband, I didn't have him to tell everyone. And so I was the one, I mean, myself and my daughters and family, but I was having to say it, and I realised that there are certain words that I still can't say. And people know what I'm talking about when I say I'm going to visit Kat at the church. They know what I'm talking about, but I can't say the word.
No, you really can't.
And it's and other people have said the same, that there are certain words that they will avoid, and it's because maybe you should try and say them to get yourself used to it, or maybe actually those words will just not be in my vocabulary anymore, and I will avoid those words.
Could I just refer to this document, Sadiq? It's really good. It's about what to say and what not to say when consoling someone who is grieving, and it's really interesting. So many times it's challenging to find the correct word, and you've got to be careful you don't use a word that glorifies suicide. So if you were to say, they are in a better place now, that kind of gives everybody else a feeling that maybe it is a good thing. So instead of saying they're in a better place now, because that might be something that you might want to say to the bereaved, because you want to console them. Okay, but you can say, I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm here for you, rather than saying they're in a better place now, because that implies suicide is a solution to reach a better place. And there's another one here, it's quite, rather than saying, I'm sure they loved you very much, because then that would let the mourners develop their own feelings, you see. Whereas what you need to be saying is, I wanted to let you know that I'm someone you can reach out to if you need. Or you could say, I know there are no words that can heal your pain, but I want you to know that you are in my thoughts. And then instead of using the word, their suffering is over. So if you say their suffering is over, that implies the loved one was in a bad place. Whilst they were alive, and that suicide was a solution for that problem. So I kind of found this quite interesting, and I thought
it's very good.
And there are things that people say with genuine love and care, but it makes you bristle, and you just think, no, don't think about what you've just said. And people, so that you've just said you didn't know what to say to us. People don't. I mean, people say to me, oh, you're so brave, and I think, you have no idea. I'm the least brave person, but people just want to, they want to love you and hold you, and they just don't know how to do that at best. So.
And sometimes it's not about saying anything, it's about being there. And I've realized that it's about letting them take the lead, letting them talk, and sharing their pain, listening into their pain. And that's all it is sometimes, it's just a shoulder to cry on.
And people react so differently, even within our family. How I'm dealing with things is very different to my daughter, to my stepdaughters. We're all in pain, but it's how we want to be treated by others is different. So I want to talk, the others don't want to talk, or on occasion do. So it's really, there isn't a one size fits all.
No, definitely not. It's 5:37. You're listening to Al-Imdaad Radio. Our guest speakers are Angela Allen and Imam Fazlur Rahman, and today's topic is bereaved by suicide. Bags for Strife is an organisation, an NGO organisation, a third sector organisation that Angela has set up following the tragic loss of two loved ones, family members, within the last 18 months. And we're having a discussion in terms of what each other's thoughts and feelings are in terms of, when somebody passes away, or in comparison to somebody who, again, I have to think twice when I say commit suicide, or it's one of those that's naturally just comes the rolls of the tongue. But it is a subject that is taboo, and the discussion Maulana mentioned, Imam mentioned earlier on, is a taboo subject in all communities, regardless of race, color, creed. It affects everybody. It affects all communities. How each communities deal with it's one of those where what best way of treating somebody treats it with faith, somebody non-faith, family, friends, and a question that arose in my head last night, and I'm put to both Imam Fazal and Angela, that how would this death be different to, say for example, somebody who died of illness, or somebody who died of an RTA, a road traffic accident. How would both death, it's a death, ultimate death, the loss of life, but in comparison, how would they both compare in your mind?
So I think from my perspective, I mean, any loss, there's no competitiveness with loss.
No.
There isn't a hierarchy, but there is a difference.
Yeah.
So people will hurt as much as we all hurt from losing someone from suicide. But I think the main difference is the guilt that you will live with forever. So, and I suppose anyone will have guilt if you lost your husband in a road traffic accident. You could think, well, I shouldn't have sent him out to get the sugar that day, or there'll be some association. But I just think it's different with suicide, and it's not just the family. It's all of Kat's and Damien's friends will hold their own guilt, and that was so apparent and has been so apparent since their losses. And I don't know how to tell them not to feel like that when I feel like that. I just think it's something that you have got to live with. But I think for me that's the biggest. Yeah.
And I'll bring Imam Fazal in, but when you say guilt, the one guilt that stuck with, it will stay with me for the rest of my life with Kat, is we're supposed to meet up for a coffee. She was coming into town. I said, Uncle Sadiq, are you in the office? I said, I am. Can we hook up for a coffee? And I said yes, and then something came up last minute, and then I didn't see her after that. So that is one guilt that will stay for the rest of my life, and it's one of them. Cat's always there. But yeah, Mona.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So loss is a loss of life, and obviously it affects everybody really. But I suppose perception is key here. And if a person was to die of an illness or car accident, it's not of his making. Okay. It's an act of God. And the Islamic ruling behind people who have suffered an illness and died, and the teachings we have received from the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Islamic scriptures, is that that death is a death that is considered to be of value and worth in the eyes of God, because you've been suffering and you've been patient, you've accepted that as an illness or whatever it may be from God, and then you naturally give in and you die as a natural death. And so people see that differently to somebody who might want to act God. Now, of course, the problem here is we're making assumptions, and we're assuming, we little do we know what the motive and reason behind that death was, or the person who took his life was. It could be something that's beyond his control. It could be, and it could be something that's hereditary. It runs in the family. You know, the imbalance of chemicals in your mind and brain. And there's hundreds of other reasons. It could be a love story gone wrong. Okay. It could be external forces, and I don't know. And I think one of the key things here is, and this is about language, and it's about how to deal with it post-vention, is not to make assumptions, but also not to kind of glorify it by using words which would be acceptable. And I suppose the difference would be that people would see suicide as something going against the Islamic injunctions, because life is sacred, because God's told you that He is merciful, and we're not to despair from His mercy. And when a person gives in, it's almost his acknowledging that God isn't merciful. If that makes sense. But I think this is where the community leaders need to come in and kind of manage it in a way where it's not seen to be a taboo. You know, we still give that person the respect, give them the proper funeral, seek forgiveness from the Lord. Okay, at the end of the day, we can't judge. You know, God is the judge as to how He's going to deal with this person, and so it's important that we kind of manage the situation such that people don't see it as a taboo.
Yeah. Do you think it's hidden in communities then? Do you think there's more suicide than is declared or admitted to or not?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say so, because people would just want to brush it under the carpet.
That's right.
And I know of families who have people. It's because you remember, suicide is an outcome of a number of things. It could be isolation. It could be mental health. It could be all sorts of other things. And when you don't do the right intervention at the right time, then you become hopeless and you despair. But a lot of people just don't want to acknowledge that they have people in the family with mental health problems. And then, of course, if that leads to, God forbid, suicide, then they would want to cover that up too. And then people don't know. And if people don't know, they're not going to get that support and help.
Yeah.
And it's just going to it's like almost like a snowball effect.
Yeah, I completely agree.
No, absolutely. Probably that leads on to the question which I want to ask you, Imam, for this is, what is the position of Islam on suicide and the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, so I talked about it earlier. It is prohibited. There's no two ways about it. And and as I said earlier, it's very, very clear that Quran makes human life sacred. Allah makes life sacred, and in numerous places, God mentions not to take a life, because it's not our position to do so. Life is full of emotions. You have joyful occasions that give you a high, but then you have dark moments that plunge you into darkness and sadness. But I suppose despair comes when you can't control those emotions, and that's where your faith comes in. So if you go through sad and dark moments in your life, either through trauma, or it could be anything else, trials and tribulations, health problems, I think one has to see it through the lens of the fact that my God is in control of my life, and I'm letting him drive my car of life because he knows where I'm going. And if he wants to test me with illness, then I'm going to accept that. So it's almost that psychological acceptance of the fact that God is in control. So, and that's why there's a very interesting saying from the prophetic traditions that every affair of a believer is strange, because if he's going through good and he's grateful, that's good for him. And if he's going through bad and he's patient, that's also good for him. So there's never a losing situation. And so yes, you have these problems, in life, ups and downs, but I suppose Islam has also given some weapons to be able to deal with it, and that's patience, that's gratitude, and that's trust. And sometimes they come in short supply when you're going through problems, when you're going through difficulties, and that, I suppose, is important for the religious and spiritual intervention. So
excellent. Thank you for that. Listeners, viewers, you are listening to Al-Imdaad Radio. Al-Imdaad Foundation is a humanitarian aid relief organization that operates in 73 countries. Today the topic is bereaved by suicide, and the guest we have here in the studio from Blackburn in United Kingdom's Imam Fazl Rahman, who is the Muslim chaplains at 3 major hospitals in the area, and also the Star Academy, and board member of the Faith and Character Education Board. And alongside myself, we have Angela Allen. Angela has worked for the voluntary sector in Blackburn for almost 18 years. Now is the chief executive of the organisation called
Spring North,
because I'm always referred to Families and Health and Wellbeing Consortia. So Spring North was well after my time. Angela tragically lost 2 of her very close family friends to suicide, and along with other bereaved families have set up an organisation called Bags for Strife to provide some support to other families. Angela, 18 months since the tragedy happened with Kat and then from Damien. I know Damien is his birthday, 58 on the 6th of July, and it's the
he would have been 59 last year. It would be his
60 this year.
So yeah,
so he turned 60 the day after my birthday. And I always used to get a happy birthday text from Damien, and that Sunday I didn't get the text, which was unusual, but the day was busy, and it didn't cross my mind. It would have probably eventually would have stuck that Damien's not text, and his texts were very
inappropriate.
Yes, but very lovingly as well, because he's always called me my dear brother, bleep 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 bleep, and then happy birthday bleep 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 bleep, and that was always to be the joke. And then for the past 16 years I used to then copy and paste that text the next day and text it back to him, and it didn't happen this last Sunday, and that will stay with me. So these are little thoughts, maybe 2 that I could just name and list. But yourself, Kat, Livs, Annie, and the families will have so many. And how does one family, immediate family, what impact does it have in the family as a one? Then work, school, and within the community.
Yeah, I think within our family, I think we luckily can laugh a lot. Even
I've seen that.
Even the when we were planning Damien's funeral, and Livs, Annie and Tash kind of took over the reins, and they jokingly were going to set up a new funeral company called Alan's Putting the Fun in Funerals. We were able to laugh at points that I think if others were looking in would go, what is wrong with that family? But humour is massive. It was very important to both Damien and Kat, and that's what's kept us. I think going back to the friends and family, the wider family, I've got a very good
social support.
Yeah, I've got a great family, and really good friends. It was interesting though, to see the impact, because I know with any loss, I can remember losing my father. This is a long time ago, but I remember looking at his friends who were sobbing outside of his room, and I remember thinking, what are you crying about? He's my dad. And then when you grow up, I suppose, you see the impact. My dad spent more of his time at that time of his life with his friends than he did with his own family, so of course he was a massive loss. And similarly, Kat was you knew Kat. She was the life and soul. She had so many friends, and to see the impact of that on them, and then for me, the impact on my work colleagues who have known me very well, and have always been a fantastic support. And unfortunately, one of them lost her brother very shortly after Damien last year, which was just, we had kind of the hex sign over our door for a while at the office. But you don't realise the impact that it has on those people that aren't your family, but are your work family. And then they'll go home to their families and they'll talk about the stuff that they've listened to during the day, you know, the changes to the work dynamic, and then so they're bringing it home to their families are going to be impacted. And that ripple effect that, you know, or the domino or the whatever, Newton's
Snowball.
cradle, you know, you just think it's never ending. It's not just the mother and the dad and the sisters or the brothers, it's the everyone, you know, that there are hundreds of people. And I think in a report I saw, it said that at least 252 people, I don't know why it's so exact, are impacted by one death. I would say in the case of Kat, you know, it was triple that, just because she was
that by 5.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if you took that as an average, 252 people affected by one.
Significant.
It's massive. So what is going on? We're talking about Bags for Strife for families. We do want to extend it into the workplace and others, because we need to recognise that people's mental health will be impacted by a loss of a colleague or a colleague's daughter or a colleague's husband, you know, people, and it's not just on that day, it can be weeks and months and years afterwards. So we just want to recognise that, and for employees to recognise that, and, you know, the faith communities to recognise that as well.
Oh, brilliant. Imam Faisal, I've got a question for you. How can a person with suicidal thoughts bring themselves back from the brink from an Islamic perspective? I know you alluded earlier on a bit on it, but in terms of...
So yeah, I mean, Islam doesn't exclude the interventions that are available from the medical perspective or even from the professional perspective. And so that's important. I think people sometimes are deluded towards thinking that spiritual intervention and religious intervention is sufficient and will be able to get him back on track. But that's not always the case. And Islam actually advocates that whatever good that you see that you think is going to work in terms of intervention, then that needs to be adopted. So I think the first thing I would say, Sadiq, is, and I'm no professional, but early intervention is vital, as you know. Giving the right help is important. And the key element is that, of course, finding the reason why somebody might be having those suicidal thoughts. And there could be a lot of reasons. And perhaps looking at how that could be tackled. Is it substance abuse? You know, is it, as I said, a love story gone wrong? Is it something to do with exam stress? You know, COVID. People have not been able to have that one-to-one, and therefore they get to a time in the year where they know they have exams, and now they're not kind of prepared. So that stress can also affect somebody's mental health. So I think that diagnosis is important. But from a religious and spiritual perspective, I think we've got to realize that your relationship with your Lord is important, and that needs to be strengthened. So from an Islamic perspective, I think we need to restore that sense and feeling of despair and hopelessness with strength and faith. And that's going to come with this Islamic counseling, but also to try and talk about the mercy of Allah, talk about how we as humans are here in this world for a short period of time, and the fact that everything that happens to us is in essence a test from God. And so kind of introducing Islamic counseling from that perspective is important. I think also be mindful that feelings of hopelessness and despair and that scenario of failure in life sometimes can come from whispers of Satan. Now, I say this in a very light way, but that is a belief that we have, that because Satan is created by God for a reason, and he is the avowed enemy of humans, where his job is to whisper temptations, whisper negativity, whisper thoughts that would take you away from God, simply because he was thrown out by God. And obviously you need to have some kind of faith background to understand this, Angela, but even Christians understand this, that Satan was thrown out of God, out of paradise by God for a reason, and his job was to keep humans distant from God, make them godless in essence. And so sometimes those feelings that a person is going through, the feeling of hopelessness, despair, failure, sadness, anxiety, worry, yes, they can be triggered off with traumatic events or any other situation and circumstances in life, but we believe that that's also an intervention by Satan. And for that reason, spiritual intervention, invocation and supplications from the Quran, and recitals and readings from the Quran are important. So I think it's a multifaceted approach, I would say. You know, it's not just the spiritual and religious, but also looking at the conventional and the professional medical intervention.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the support that you've had from family and friends, it's getting you through what it's got up to now, and it'll continue to do so. Do you think it will get easier as time goes on?
No.
Okay.
That's difficult. Sorry.
It could, I can imagine.
It's gone but not forgotten.
Gone for now.
Sorry.
God, no, it's okay. It is a yes, it's a very sensitive subject, topic to talk about, and it's Angela's brave. You're brave for you to come here and to talk about bereaved by suicide, and it's not an easy talk. And you've done well up till now to hold on.
1 minute to go, he loses it.
No. So
We don't have tissue for you as well.
do you want to get some tissue?
I meant to bring tissue. No, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay.
I think the answer, by the way, was no. It will never get easier.
No, it does, and that's the thing. It's and I say that, and maybe the question probably didn't come out right. I mean, in the last 3-4 years, or up to 10 years, I've kind of laid 4 people in the grave with my own bare hands. and you feel the first time was my father, 12 years ago, and then my mother was 4 years ago, and then my brother-in-law, nearly 3 years ago, and my niece 18 years ago. But does your mind, this is me personally, do I block it off thinking it's just another one, it's just another one, it's just another one, and it's just because that's how my mindset is programmed, where I'm not allowed to show any emotions, and you just got to deal with it. Maybe that's probably the reason. And the other aspect of it is I got to deal with it, and I got to make sure the people who rely on me don't fall apart. So I need to be strong for them. So then it keeps your emotions at bay. So it's a difficult one. It's a very, very, very difficult one. And you mentioned and touched upon Alicia, because it wasn't not so long after Damien, and you're right. It was like a hex outside your office door, because we were thinking, what's next and who's next? And it became, when we heard about Judith and when Dougie passed away, that time we thought it was a shock, and I know what Judith went through because we were all there at that time. But then later on in life, for history to repeat itself, not once but twice, there's only one thing which we can always do, is hope. And I said to that very night, when Joe Wilson from the BBC Radio suggested, what do you mean by hope? And it's having the opportunity to participate in everything again in life. And I always stand by that, and I always kind of stays in, with me. Everybody probably deals with it so many different ways. Livesey, Annie, they were quiet at that time when we met them. Tash, the question is how are they individuals dealing with them? How's Annie and Liv's dealing with them? I know they're your stepdaughters. And then on the other side, how is Tash dealing with them?
Tash is quite artistic. She's actually a mechanic, but she's really good at drawing.
She's an engineer.
She's an engineer.
Johnsons and Johnsons. Yes.
She draws things and she writes stuff down, and that's her
way of expressing grief.
And she drew a lovely one. And some of these images we're going to put into the bags because we just think they will relate to anyone. And I can't remember the exact words, but it's a picture of a girl sitting over a pond or a lake, and it just says, I dip my toe into the water of grief, but I won't subsume myself in it. And that's, she consciously, I think, won't let herself go deep, whereas I don't have that self-control.
No. Okay.
Or I allow myself to do it. And I think Annie's maybe more like Tash, and I think Liv's is more like me, where we do go, and when we go, and then you kind of pull yourself out of it. But everyone deals, we know, with grief in so many. There is no right way to grieve.
There isn't.
I mean,
I mean, I've seen the family support around you, Ange, and it's brilliant with Janice, Colleen, and your whole Graham brother, and everybody around Belfast here. At that time in Waddington, obviously you're not there anymore. Judith and the gang and Ali and everybody else. It was just what I would call the Asian Irish family, because that Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock, was it 12 o'clock when I got the news, instinct, what Asians do, end up at the hospital. So what did I do? I drove straight up to the hospital. Thinking it's an Asian family, and there you go, as if they're going to allow you in straight into the room. And first thing I did was ring Damien. I said, Damien, where are you? And I go, we're just leaving the hospital. So it's like, and then there's me waiting to drive to Waddington, but everybody kept reminding me, Sadiq, this is not Asian death. It's, you can't just literally give them space and time. And it's one of them where I couldn't wait to be with you guys, but within probably a day or two, within 24 hours, people started flying across from Belfast and everywhere, and people started, family and support was there. But everyone kept saying, when is Sadiq arriving with the food? Because that's one thing as soon as you have guests and visitors,
I suppose that's one way of supporting the bereaved.
Yeah,
it is, looking after the children, providing them with food, because the last thing they want to think about is where the food's going to come from.
Yeah. Absolutely. In fact, again, that's, I think, one of the things in the bags is that kind of advice for friends and family is if you do something practical. Somebody said, it was somebody on the board, and they were saying somebody came around to clean my windows, and it's like you wouldn't, it was something, didn't know what else to do, but they thought, well, maybe that will help.
That's right.
I don't think the person felt offended by the fact that somebody else thought her windows were dirty, but I just think it's something practical.
Absolutely. When my mother passed away, we had a very late night. It was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning by the time we nodded off. But somebody at 9 o'clock came to drop some breakfast off, and at that time we were still in bed thinking, who's here to come and pay their condolences and respects at 9 in the morning? So we reluctantly went and opened the door, and there's blessed 2 women there stood there with food, with breakfast, to say, and those are the things. But Angela, it was a difficult subject. Listeners, audience, viewers, tonight's subject was bereaved by suicide. We've had different aspects, interpretations, thoughts, feelings expressed by Angela and Imam Fazl. Like we said, we're no experts, we know speciality, but I'm hoping the service which Bags for Strife will provide will be a multi-supported help and support that will be for all communities, and Al-Imdaad Foundation will vouch to help and support the organisation in any way or form, to distribute, to support, to signpost, to direct, and even to help or guide if it's required, with the experts of Imams, of the language that we use, the interpreting that we use within the contents of the bag. So that'll be really, we'll be here more than willing to help. I just want to kind of come into an end. We've got 5 minutes. I just want to concluding words from Imam Fazl, concluding words by Angela, and then we'll end the show. So we'll start with ladies before first.
I mean, I find this evening really, really good to talk to both of you, to hear the Muslim perspective as well, which obviously I was unaware of. I grew up in a Christian family, and some of the beliefs, even in the 1960s, 70s, were very much the same around suicide being a sin. And to have that put upon a bereaved family, as you said to begin with, is just additional guilt, isn't it? So it's really good to be able to have this discussion with, hopefully, people in the audience who may have lost someone, or certainly will know somebody who has taken their own life through suicide. And my advice to you would be there to support that person, support that family, give them your love, and wrap your arms around them.
That's very kind.
And how do they contact Bags for Strife?
So I think the best way to do that would, if I can get them to contact you, Sadiq, and you can then just forward on the details. That would be the easiest.
Yeah, perfect.
So first of all, thank you for inviting us. It's been an eye-opener, and you see different perspectives when you dig deep into the topic, and it's just not what you thought it was. And you need to, and one thing that I'm going to take away from here is that we need to as Muslim leaders, faith leaders, look at this topic differently. I think the imams need to talk about it from the mosques, and maybe look at how support could be extended to families from mosques, because I think mental health is definitely treatable. Suicide is preventable, and these challenging times are surmountable, but it needs to be done collectively.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. Viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope the subject was, yes, it was emotional, but I hope it was interesting for you. Like Angela said, look out, reach out, and try to get as much of support out there. There is support out there. It's just where to locate it and find it is we're here, Al-Imdaad Foundation. If you want any more further information in terms of bags for strife, please do contact Al-Imdaad Foundation. Again, just want to say thank you to the listeners, thank you to the viewers. Most importantly, I wouldn't do my job right if I didn't thank my guest, Imam Fazl and Angela Allen, two people that are very dear to my heart, people who I've worked with, lived with for the best part of past 20 years. So I'd like to say a heartfelt gratitude to you both for coming in. For Imam Fazl not knowing the actual topic but then researching into it and providing us very useful information from the Islamic perspective, and Angela sharing your inner thoughts, demons, feelings, and sharing your loss with our audience. We really appreciate. And I just want to mention, the support around you, your work colleagues, and I wouldn't be doing my job again right if I didn't thank them. So I'd like to thank Philomena, who probably listen to this or watch this later on, Alicia, Wahida, and Charlotte, and Martin, who's just joined the team, as well as Dave, your chairman. So I'd like to say a big, massive thank you to them for supporting you, as well as Judith. She's been through it all as well. So a big thank you to all the support that you have, which I've got to meet them and got to know them well. Jazakallah to all the audience. Tomorrow the program will continue as per usual, 5 o'clock till 6:15. Tomorrow's topic is food for thought. One of the charities that we do here on a local basis on every Sunday is to feed one hot meal to the homeless people, where here downstairs between 11:30 to 12:30 a hot meal is served when people are coming to collect. So tomorrow we'll be making an appeal for the Food for Thought, and we have the founder of the Food for Thought and few volunteers who come here relentless every Sunday on a rota basis and pack the food and serve the food to the homeless people and the most vulnerable people. We'll have some volunteers coming tomorrow at the radio show as well. So please join in, please tune in. But meanwhile, I'd like to say a big jazakallah for all of you to tuning in, for listening in, and to joining us in this topic. And last but not least, I'd like to say a big jazakallah to Imam Fazl, and a big thank you to Angela. Jazakallah. My name is Sadiq Patel with Al-Imdaad Radio Foundation. Jazakallahu khair wa ahsanul jaza. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So yeah, well done. I suppose. So I think this is an outlet for you, isn't it, Angela? I think it would help you in your journey. This does not. Is it?